Hello and welcome to our 21st podcast. I'm Linda and here's Mike.
Hi, Linda. Welcome, everyone. In this podcast series, we are exploring social threefolding by reading and discussing the original 1919 basic book by Rudolf Steiner, The Core Points of the Social Question. We are currently reaching the end of Chapter 2, Realistic Attempts at Solutions, about the principle and theory of social threefolding. After having spent some time discussing the high priority need to separate state and economy, we turned in our last podcast to the third social area, the spiritual cultural life, or just the cultural life, and had been discussing why it is so critically important that this be separate and independent as well. Once again, we must completely rethink our current ideas and assumptions about this cultural life, which refers to the life of individual abilities of all kinds, and how these enter the societal dynamic involving other people. In this social area, if we picture to ourselves all the abilities of every unique individual person, we have before us a highly differentiated dynamic space that serves as a kind of wellspring, a point of origin from which everything else in society flows. All these individual abilities and talents have a power of their own that work to form and shape society, and these are met in turn from the other side by the abilities individuals have to understand, recognize, and appreciate the talents and abilities of others. There must be a way for society to support what is positive in this area and bring what is positive into fruition in a way that is truly free and uninfluenced and unhindered by the economy or the right state. Therefore, this area of the cultural life must form a third independent area that is separate and autonomous. Our current thinking about this free cultural life is clouded because we have become accustomed to imagining this as being fused to the life of the rights state. We have come to imagine it as normal that the state funds and administers education and research. However, we do not really fathom the extent to which the state has made this cultural life into something quite unfree, in fact. Many state or public education systems around the world have sought to make public education a tool for nation building, including standardized language, shared identity and historical narrative, and national patriotism. The political state prepares its citizens to participate in its governance system, including teaching compliance with laws, societal norms, and institutional hierarchies. Public education can sometimes also focus on a globally competitive workforce, on social justice and the overcoming of class and racial divisions, and, within the limits of its own system, on personal growth and individual potential. Now, of course, it was entirely justified that at a certain point in history, education, which had been strongly linked to the religious life, had to be separated from this religious life by being brought under the control of the state. But this process of liberation must now be taken one step further still. So education, religion, science, art, worldview, and all aspects of culture are also now liberated and made independent of the state. It is essential that the cultural life, which is linked to the innermost human essence, be able to stand autonomously on the basis of its own original and creative impulses. Of course, the state is unable to influence certain aspects of the cultural life, such as the principles of mathematics or the laws of physics or chemistry, but the state can influence the way these are taught as a cultural expression. And the state can most certainly influence and shape the actual content of subjects like history, geography, literature, and language. Within an educational system administered by the state, these subjects become shaped by the needs of the state. And when the state is shaped by this or that political power, sometimes by the ruling classes, sometimes by the working class, it takes on an ideological character. Because of this, a mistaken view has arisen that all cultural life is just a reflection of political and economic realities. Okay, so that's kind of a summary of what we have been discussing recently. Is there anything else that we want to talk about before we start?
All good?
Okay, great. Let's switch to the screen share then.
Hmm.
So last time we had read this paragraph that starts at the bottom of page 64, such a view which stultifies. And I'll just recap that paragraph and then we'll go on, okay?
Hmm.
So that paragraph basically, he was saying that in order to understand his views, Steiner's views about the free cultural life, we must recognize that there is an objective realm of the mind called the spiritual life, or in German, das Geistesleben, that exists independently of the material world. Under the influence of 18th century philosophy and 19th century materialism, we today have come to believe, for instance, that the physical brain is the cause of our consciousness and our thinking. We have come to believe that the idea of, say, 2 plus 2 equals 4 is true only as a consequence of the activity of physical brains. However, the physical brain is really more like a mirror, a means for our thinking to be reflected back to our mind and become conscious to us. The world of spirit, this objective mental world, is an independent world of thinking activity where certain facts and processes like 2 plus 2 equals 4 exist in a non-physical way. This spiritual world is one that exists completely independently of the material world. And we need a certain independence of our own thinking just to recognize this, as Steiner explains in a thorough and compelling way in his book written 25 years earlier, The Philosophy of Freedom. This separate spiritual realm that bears its own content within itself must correspondingly have its own social area, one that is free from the influences of state and economy, which is, namely, the free spiritual cultural life, in which everything related to our thinking and our abilities is all interconnected. Social democracy, the social political impulse that has come to dominate the West since Steiner's time, which believes in a strong democratic state that regulates and taxes otherwise free market capitalism and strives to create a fair welfare state alongside this social democracy has merely inherited past habits of thinking. Social democracy seeks to incorporate cultural life into the state body, which is, in turn, built upon the economic life. With the advance of social democracy, religion has come to be seen increasingly as a private affair, independent of the state. This independence is, of course, justified, and indeed all aspects of the cultural life must be private and independent affairs. However, social democracy did not separate religion in order to promote the legitimate autonomy of religion, but rather because a social democratic state has no need for religion and considers this a waste of the state's resources. However, religion cannot truly be free as long as the other branches of culture remain shackled to the state. What is necessary is that all cultural life, including religion, be liberated. So that's what we discussed last time. Do you remember?
Yes, I do. Yes.
Okay. Is there anything that you wanted to add before we continue?
No, I'm eager to go further into an understanding of how important the cultural life being free
Mm.
is and having new thinking about it. Um, it really speaks of freedom and speaks of an important part that we're so not aware of currently in our society. So
Yeah,
let's see what he says.
exactly. He says something about this in the next paragraph, and he also addresses some of the fears that people may have. So let's just read on in the next paragraph. He'll be saying we're talking about at the top of page 66 here.
Hmm.
Um, the cultural life must rest upon the free needs of the human soul. The work and achievements of teachers, artists, and others involved in free cultural activity will be received by people who themselves are protected by the state from being subject only to the obligation of labor. People who have, by law, sufficient leisure that they may develop an appreciation for spiritual achievements. Now, some people might protest that if people had too much leisure, that they would only squander their time. And if schools became genuinely free, that we would revert to illiteracy. But what does this view really correspond to? Or does it perhaps only reveal something personal about those who express such views? Today, many people only know the shackled cultural life that has never been able to inspire them. They cannot grasp what a truly independent cultural life would actually be like. Okay, so if you
Yeah,
could read that, please.
sure. Not only the bringing forth, but also the reception of this cultural life by humanity must be based on the free need of the soul. Teachers, artists, and so on, who in their social position are exclusively in direct connection with legislation and administration which arise from the cultural life itself and which are supported only by its impulses, will be able to develop, through their way of working, a receptivity for their achievements among people who are protected by the autonomously operating political state from being subject only to the obligation to work, and instead are also given by law the leisure that awakens an understanding of spiritual achievements. Such ideas may awaken the belief in those who consider themselves to be practical in life. People will drink away their leisure time, and we will revert to illiteracy if the state provides for such leisure, and if attending school is left up to people's free understanding. But just let such pessimists see what happens when the world is no longer under their influence. All too often, this influence is determined by a certain feeling that quietly whispers to them how they use their leisure and what they had needed to acquire a little education for themselves. They cannot reckon with the inspiring force that a truly self-sufficient cultural life has within the social organism, because the shackled one, they know, has never been able to exert such an inspiring force upon them.
Okay, thank you. So I think Steiner's trying to paint a picture here of something that we can't really imagine. We only know state education or education that's tied to economic life. We don't really know what it's like to have a truly free, autonomous, independent education system and what that can mean to inspire people. Uh, I
Mhm.
think I think maybe one of the things that comes closest is self-education. When we take it upon ourselves, if we have spare time, to teach ourselves to learn about something, we can really get interested in something. We can really go deep into something and imagine our whole education system was like that as a child.
Mhm.
It would make such a difference.
Mhm.
And the arguments against saying, well, if we didn't have public education, we would all just, you know, waste our time and become illiterate. It's because people don't have that experience, perhaps.
Mhm. I think there's a fair amount of point just because having gone through COVID, I had lots of things that I wanted to do, and I was still working, but there was a whole bunch of leisure time because I didn't have the traveling and stuff like that. So there was a tendency in me that I could see that I didn't get a lot accomplished that I wanted to. There was a lot of leisure time, but there were also times where absolutely something was very interesting to me and I delved and honed my skills. So both were true for me. So I can see how the people who fear that oh we'd just waste away our time or drink away our time would have a legitimacy, like if I am free, I'm going to do anything that I want to. But some people might just want to learn something and focus in on something, right? So, yeah,
Yeah,
that's what comes up for me.
exactly. So he's painting the picture of a different way to even think about education that we don't really have an imagination for.
Hmm.
A free education is something there's no historical precedent really, except maybe, uh, like you said, independent learning or sometimes private tutoring and so on.
Hmm.
So yeah, there's another whole imagination here.
Got it.
So let's go on to the next paragraph. I hope what we've just said alleviates some of the fears that might come up for people
Hmm.
around what he's saying. Do you feel like you have any remaining concerns?
I mean, something that we talked about last time, which was, is it going to be a free for all? Like, is any information going to be able to find its way through something that is not based on reality or ridiculous or I guess you've often said in any of these free societal sections that it's not a utopia, that we are including all kinds of people with our idiosyncrasies and, psychoses or neuroses, or including all of that. So, I mean, it's interesting to begin to imagine that there would be people that would want to impart information that is based on truth,
Hmm.
authenticity, objectivity.
Hmm.
I would imagine that there would be really well-meaning, competent individuals that would come together to build a curriculum that would be autonomous, but also helpful to society. Yeah.
Yeah, and like we said last time, Steiner's not advocating for no curriculum. He's just saying any education system of whatever form it takes is independent of the political state and the economy. So it could have within itself an independent curriculum.
Mm.
So there's different possibilities to form this. He's not specifying it has to be like this or like that.
Mhm. Mm.
I think his argument is just simply it needs to have its own autonomy to decide for itself and not be
Mm.
dictated to by the state or the economy.
Right.
If an education system arises where there's a lot of sort of abnormal viewpoints and so on, I mean, there's a tendency for this to correct itself because people will just not be welcoming to abnormal viewpoints, and so if there's an education system that is very non-standard, we'll say, or teaches a non-standard worldview, it may be that those people have a tough time in society or something. So these things will have a tendency to correct themselves.
Mm. Over time.
Yeah.
Mm.
Like, I'm talking about teaching some oddball
Yeah.
viewpoint or,
Well, I hear you. And we also know that there are charismatic characters in the history that have really um, influenced vulnerable minds.
yeah.
So those are still possibilities within this realm.
And it is still a possibility, but it's not tied to a large organization like the state, you see. So
Right.
so
Got
the
it.
the power and extent of those individuals will be according to their own ability to bring their viewpoints forward. And
Hmm.
there will be other people with different viewpoints. And so it will be a kind of milieu of different viewpoints. And that's the nature of a free cultural life, I think. It's not that somebody has their hands on the instrument that will drive a certain viewpoint into every single classroom in the nation.
Right.
This is the problem we have today.
Hmm. Agreed. Hmm.
Okay, should we go on?
Yep.
So this next little paragraph, both the political state. So he's going to be talking about how the social flow really needs to be reversed so that the state and economy receive what they need, which is the vitalizing, fruitful influx from the independent spiritual cultural life. So the free cultural life will flow into state and economy through independent law and vocational schools. And those who work and gain experience within the legal and economic life will have no difficulty transitioning into the cultural life to teach. Okay?
Okay. Okay. Both the political state and the economic life will receive the influx from the spiritual life that they need from the self-governing cultural organism. Even vocational education for the economic life will only be able to unfold its full power through a free collaboration of the economic life with the cultural organism. People trained in this way will enliven the experiences they have in the economic area through the power that comes to them from liberated cultural achievements. People with experience gained from the economic life will be able to transition into the cultural organization where they will have a fruitful effect on what needs to be fructified.
Yeah, so if you remember in the preface to the 1920 edition, which he wrote after this, he expanded on this paragraph a little. And back then we had talked about how the vocational schools, the training for work-related training would be handled within the cultural life and not part of the economic life. And it would be a free education. The same with the law schools, that instead of the law schools being under the thumb of the state, teaching all the existing laws and existing beliefs of the state, it will be a free law school that teaches about law, and then the graduates will come out into the political life and they might change things so that there will be a flow from the abilities of the cultural life into the state and economic life,
Mm,
rather than the way it is now, where the state and the economic life flow into the cultural life.
mhm, mhm.
And
Yeah.
I'm not saying something radical here. I'm not saying that they're going to completely change everything, but I'm just saying that the abilities of human beings are going to flow out into the whole society
Mhm.
in a more free way. That's the picture.
100%. I mean, I can see this um, being a very key, important piece because where minds gather and come to a conclusion, they've put their whole life, 40, 50 years into believing something, and then a new mind comes along and says, yeah, I'm not quite seeing it this way, or here's a development the older minds can quash because it is in their interest, or, you know, the opposite. It's not in their interest to actually allow for free flow.
Yeah, I think what he's talking about is really a fair competition of ideas, which is not backed by institutional powers, where institutional powers can overrule an idea even if it's a good idea, just because of the institutional power. That if you have a free cultural life, then the ideas themselves will have to stand on their own merits, not necessarily backed by the state or economic powers. And I
Got
think
it.
this will allow this fructification that he talks about.
Hmm. Fair enough.
Okay, should we go on?
Yep.
So in this next paragraph, at the top of 67, he's going to speak about how, from out of its own realm, the culture will have a positive impact on political life. Through the positive influence of the independent cultural life, the ordinary working person will feel satisfied with the position they hold within the social whole. They will understand that the management of labor is necessary to produce all that is needed to support them. They will feel a common bond between labor and management because both are based on individual human abilities. They will develop rights that ensure a fair sharing of profits, and they will see the need for a portion to flow back in support of education and culture because this is what makes all other achievements possible. Although what is purely individual about the cultural life remains a most intimately private matter, what someone achieves culturally for others within the whole social context will be able to count on compensation provided freely by those who value this achievement. Anyone who cannot obtain what they need through such free compensation within the cultural life will have to turn to other avenues within the right state or the economic life. Okay, so if you
Okay.
could read that,
Yep.
please.
Mhm. In the area of the political state, the necessary healthy views will be formed through such a free effect of cultural achievement. The manual laborer will, under the influence of such cultural achievements, acquire for themselves a satisfactory feeling regarding the position their labor holds within the social organism. They will come to the insight how, without the leadership that intentionally organizes manual labor, the social organism could not support them. They will be able to take in the feeling of the common bond between their work and the organizing forces that come from the development of individual human abilities. They will, on the basis of the political state, develop those rights, which will secure for them that share of the yield of goods that they produce, and they will freely grant the cultural achievement to which they are entitled, that share that makes its creation possible. In the area of cultural life, the possibility will arise that those who bring forth this cultural life will also live from the yields of their achievements. What someone does for themselves in the area of cultural life will remain a most intimately private matter. What someone is able to achieve for the social organism will be able to count on compensation provided freely by those to whom the cultural achievement is a need. Anyone who cannot obtain what they need through such compensation within the cultural organization will have to go over to the area of the political state or the economic life.
Okay, thank you, Linda.
Mhm,
So he's talking about how things will unfold. For example, how the point of view of the worker or the manual laborer and how they view management. Because right now, there's a kind of often a resentment, feeling of control. The management is sort of the bossing them around or whatever. But I think what he's describing is this awareness, this awakening that the laborer needs the manager to organize their labor, that a laborer can't earn any money if their labor is not organized. And so having an awareness that the management has abilities, that they have abilities. The manager needs to be aware that the worker has abilities. And this mutual awareness that comes from the free cultural life will drive a different workplace environment, a different attitude in the workplace, is I think what he's saying, that it will arise of its own accord, that people will understand that we all have abilities here. But at the same time, the management needs to have the initiative to direct the labor of the workers. This is important.
mhm,
We'll talk about this again in the next chapter, but this
mhm.
is the basic idea here.
Yeah, I mean, it's like that mutual respect.
Mhm. That's right.
Yeah,
We're in different roles. We have different roles to play. It doesn't make us better or worse. People,
right.
we just have, instead of a class division, it's more like a difference of roles. You're in this
Mhm,
role and I'm in that role.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, and hopefully the ego piece will, with this setup, it sounds like it will shift the ego. So the managers, generally speaking, or whoever is in leadership, believing that they are better than some, right, than the laborer.
And he's tying it in to some thoughts we'll discuss in the next chapter coming up. The new ownership framework, where it's not that people are the owners or managers of capital because they're rich, it's because they're competent. This is
Hmm.
the one of the changes. And the other
Hmm.
thing is that we talked about already, the labor framework, where there's a distribution contract where everyone is aligned to the same purpose to bring forth the products as efficiently as possible because everyone shares in the common result. So
Hmm.
there isn't this kind of antagonism between
Hmm.
management and worker where the like we discussed before, where the worker wants to work slowly and the manager wants them to work quickly or
Hmm.
the, cheaply or expensively or whatever. So it's an alignment because everybody wants the same goal.
Hmm.
And so the picture he's painting is a different workplace experience
Hmm.
as a
Hmm.
result. And he also says those who are capable of making a life as an artist or writer or different kinds of cultural activities, that's great. But you have to be recognized by others. And if others don't recognize your abilities, then you may have to find some other line of work.
Hmm. Hmm.
He's not painting the picture that everyone is going to be able to be an artist, even if they're not very good at this.
Hmm. Yeah. It's almost like it's almost common sense, but it's just so difficult to understand how it is that we came to this point where we're not aligned on
Mhm.
the same goal. And we have that antagonistic relationship where, yeah, I'm not going to work that much as a laborer. I'm going to sort of take my time. And it's like, because there's a fundamental unfairness and a fundamental, I guess, what I'm hearing from all of this is just this unfreedom, and you're not taken seriously. You're not respected. Your time and your effort is not respected. And when you feel that you're not respected and your contributions aren't valued as much as, say, the managers, then of course there's going to be a revolt. And if I'm not compensated in terms of being able to live a healthy life with that compensation, then of course I'm going to have a revolt. I'm going to live antagonistically. Yeah.
Yeah, and it has to do with the fusing together of the economic life and the political life. We've talked about this,
Mhm.
that the relation of management or and labor, these are fundamentally economic relations. They've now become political ones where the ruling class is separate from the working class. And this is an evolution that has sort of led in the wrong direction. And what Steiner, I agree, it's kind of common sense. We need to reorganize our society because all of these struggles are not really personal. They're a function of the social environment. And so
Mhm.
they're a reflection of the structure of our society. And so the solution is not to do things better or find better people. It's the solution is to restructure the society. And Steiner
Mhm.
is describing how we need to do this by separating into the three areas.
Mhm. Mhm.
And that will give everybody the autonomy and it will kind of loosen things up, we could say.
Mm.
Okay,
Agreed. Yep.
so we should move on.
Yep.
This next little paragraph, technical ideas at the bottom of
Mhm.
67,
Mhm.
he's going to speak about how all technical innovation flows out of the cultural life, even if this arises through participants within the economic life or the state. The compensation for this inflow will either come through the free understanding of those who need this inflow, or it will be regulated through the rights life. The funding support for the rights life itself will come from taxation. Taxes will harmonize the demands of rights consciousness and the demands of the economic life. Okay, if you could read that, please.
Sure. Technical ideas that originate in the cultural life flow into the economic life. These originate in the cultural life, even if they come directly from participants of the state or economic areas. This is where all the organizational ideas and forces that fructify the economic and state life come from. The compensation for this inflow into both social areas will either also come about through free understanding by those who depend on this inflow, or it will be regulated by rights which are formulated within the area of the political state. What this political state itself demands for its own maintenance will be raised through tax law. This will be formulated through a harmonization of the demands of rights consciousness with those of the economic life.
Okay. So I've heard people in the threefolding world say Steiner was against taxes. I think in this paragraph he says it explicitly that taxes are necessary to provide the funding for the rights state. And he has a certain view about taxes that he doesn't speak about in this book, but in the social future lectures, he has this notion of an expenditure tax. So he advocates to get rid of income tax, corporate tax, any kind of tax, pretty much, property tax, and only have one kind of tax, which is the tax on spending, expenditure. So that's where he believes we should tax things. That's his notion, and that this tax money is a kind of harmonization of the demands of rights consciousness with those of the economic life. So the economic life is about production of goods, and we can't tax too much or we won't have enough things that we need. But at the same time, we want to have certain rights, and so we need to tax a little bit to cover the costs of those rights. Because things that are rights, we could say education, policing, anything that we consider a right has to be funded. We just have to organize it such that this funding is independent and not controlled by the right state. So, for example, education could be funded by taxation as long as the state does not itself control the education. The state would pipeline funding from the economic life to schools and universities without it taking the money first. You know what I mean? It
Hmm.
pipelines it. It kind of
Hmm.
it's responsible for shifting the money from the economic life to the schools. And the
Hmm.
same with policing, for example. The law enforcement would be funded through taxes, but it would operate independently of the political leadership under a state constitution and the rule of law. The same with the right to housing, the same with the right to a fair, livable standard of living. The right state would collect and pipeline taxes to others who carry out these rights. And the right state would never actually operate housing, unemployment, and income support systems or anything like that. Taxes would be used for reallocation on the basis of fairness and rights, not power and control. And so, this imagination of the rights life within a threefold society requires us to completely rethink our current mental picture of what a government is and does. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, how is it different from like again, for someone who doesn't have an understanding of how things go right now, it's like, somebody might say, well, I don't like taxes at all, need to abolish them. And I mean, just recent examples of different types of taxations, tax different countries for the privilege of being able to sell their goods in our country, and also to protect our manufacturers or creators of goods. That's one form. Why did Steiner decide that consuming, the consumer tax is the most acceptable or maybe feasible or the best form of taxation?
Yeah. So, so let's just backtrack a little. The notion of a tariff that you described, a tax on
Hmm.
imports of imported
Hmm.
goods, is kind of a nation building concept, right? So you, by preventing or making the imported goods more expensive through taxes, it's not really to raise funds. It's more like a barrier to make to grow industry in the local nation. So it's a nation building idea. And I understand why this was done in the early times of nation building, but then once you've built the nation, in a way, you can let go of that. Another thing you just mentioned is about the expenditure tax or the consumer tax or goods and services tax or whatever you want to call it. The Steiner's principle, he describes this in the second lecture of The Social Future, which is Collected Works 332A. He says that this is the only time when money enters the economic life. money is an abstraction. Money doesn't really mean anything. It's a number on a piece of paper or on a bank account. Or if you have, for example, so much money saved up in an account or in an investment account or something, and you accumulate more money or something like that, this is an abstraction. It doesn't tell you anything about your wealth. The only thing that matters really when it comes to real wealth is what you're able to spend. So if you have money that you can't spend, then you might as well not have it. And it's really only the money that you're able to spend that makes you a wealthy person.
Hmm.
And it's this moment of transition where the abstract money enters and is exchanged for a real good or service. That is the point where the money transitions from an abstraction to a reality. And at that point, it needs to be taxed.
Hmm.
So, for instance, income. Income is a kind of abstraction. You work, let's say, or you do something, or you have dividends, or some kind of receiving some kind of money from somewhere, or a gift even. That's an abstraction. But until you spend it, it's not real. And Steiner's idea is that we shouldn't tax income. We shouldn't tax corporations. We shouldn't tax property. These are all just taxing an abstraction. We're taxing something that isn't even real.
Interesting.
The picture I have is think of water coming into a lake and then water leaving the lake. And let's say it's a steady state where the same amount of water goes into the lake and the same amount leaves the lake. Now, if you tax the income, the inflow, that you're kind of restricting how much water goes into the lake, aren't you? It'll get smaller and smaller, won't it? But
Hmm.
if you tax it on the way out, that doesn't happen. You see, it might be the same tax, but if you're taxing it on the outflow, then you can maintain this larger lake, you see. And a larger lake you can use for swimming or water skiing or whatever. But if you tax it at the income level, you kind of choke away people's abilities. Does that make sense?
It does. I never thought of it this way. I mean, it's a psychological thing as well. Like if I'm, I know when I have to pay my income taxes, it is stifling, but I'm choosing to spend money on things that are important to me, and I'm happy to pay I don't even think about the taxes that I pay in that. So, you know, there's just something about that that really, it might, like you said, it might be the same $50 that you're going to pay, but and there might be Scrooges that don't spend that are, but they wouldn't have that same. I mean, I guess they would have a limited experience of life, right? If they're not spending. But this is very interesting. It's kind of, ooh,
Hmm.
bringing something up in me that is, yeah,
So,
it's
and
cool.
another thing is we know that filing income tax is a chore.
Hmm.
I mean, it's such a difficult thing to do because the government has a limited grasp of what people's income is, and there's so many sneaky ways that you can get income without people knowing, without the government knowing. So
Hmm.
there has to be all these checks and balances, and it's a very complicated process to do income tax.
Hmm.
Whereas at the point of sale, when you buy something, all you need to do is put in a tax there. And
Hmm.
imagine where you never had to file any income tax. Whatever income you got is good, fine, no problem. But you pay the tax at the point of sale when you go to the store, and they collect the tax. In
Hmm.
in most cases, that already happens. So, just delete all the income tax work that we do. Think of all the time and energy that we spend wastefully and redundantly. Uh, we
Hmm.
we just make a larger sales tax and collect all the taxes we need there.
Right.
And secondly, the problem with taxes is that it flows to the government in what he calls in the economics lectures a fog. It sort of enters this general fog of taxation, he says, where that we pay taxes and it just goes and vanishes away. We don't really know where it goes. And it gets mixed up with monetary policy and fiscal policy, and then it's used for government programs, government, let's say, funding something that this or that politician is in favor of. And we feel like our taxes are being wasted, right? And
Hmm.
I think what he's proposing is a different concept where specifically taxes are pipelined for earmarked for education so much, and this is decided upon maybe by the three areas or leaderships of the three areas. The economic life leaders sit down with the political leaders and sit down with the independent cultural leaders and say, how much money can we realistically channel from the economic life into education? How much do we need to channel into the medical? How much do we need to channel into care services, into bridges and highways, into the police, into the military, and to sort of make a budget together, the three areas independently with their own points of view. And then the money that's raised through taxes is simply channeled into those areas, and it doesn't just vanish away into the government's coffers.
Hmm. Hmm.
There's more clarity to it. And I think if people could see this percent, this percent, this percent goes to these different areas, independent areas, then I think people will understand, oh yeah, yeah, I do feel better about paying taxes because I'm getting this, I'm getting roads, I'm getting education, I'm getting medical, I'm getting all these benefits.
Hmm.
But right now we can't do that because it's all mixed together. We don't have that separation.
Hmm. I mean, the idea of not paying income tax and not having to do that work is a utopia all its own. So, so I kind of,
Yeah, I sometimes think about all the very intelligent people, bright minds who sort of waste their life doing tax forms and tax assessments, and what a wasted life. I'm sorry, I don't mean to diminish these people. I'm diminishing that they're such brilliant people, they could be doing something else with their life.
right.
I really think it's a real tragedy,
Hmm.
a structural tragedy that these people have to be forced to do these jobs.
Hmm. Yeah, I hear you. I hadn't thought of that one either. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting thing. I mean, it's just how many different ways can we shift and change our society? I mean, he's really thought through in so many ways how, I guess, living through um, the war times that and how he saw societal dysfunction and the antagonistic relationship between the managers and the laborers and people trying, struggling to come up with answers. He really has thought through many aspects of these things. I'm actually surprised that no one has picked up on this and sort of put it into action up till now because this is really deeply again I mean I don't consider myself to be a highly intelligent to the point that this would I kind of feel like this is logical it's but yeah it's kind of sad that it hasn't been brought about. But I guess the powers that be, the people that like their structure, they benefit from it, would probably push against this.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and what you're saying is so true that I think social threefolding needs to be talked about more, and we need to understand it more. We need to study Steiner's words more, and not just pontificate about what it could be in our from our own subjective perspectives. Steiner is a brilliant mind, and he's really giving us some really clear and precise and workable, practical solutions here.
Mm,
And as you say, I agree with you that there's political forces, let's say, or certain forces, economic and political forces, that want things the way they are. They benefit from this. And so we need to do a little bit of pushing and shoving here that This isn't going to just magically happen on its own if we just
Mm.
wishfully think it into being. We have to think, what is the point of leverage? Where can we actually set to work and make this change happen, right? And in my book, Money for a Threefold Society, I speak of the point of leverage is actually the money system. That it's our banking and financial system that if we could transform that in a grassroots way, we could bring about a new ownership framework, a new labor framework, and slowly we could transform society like a kind of parallel society that would sort of squeeze out the existing one in a
Mm.
peaceful evolutionary way, right? This is my understanding of having studied this for a long time.
Mhm.
We can't really just barge into the political forum and shake our fists and say we want social change because
Right.
the political and economic powers will not let this happen.
Right.
But by changing the financial system, we can finance how threefolding can come into existence. That's my
Yeah.
belief.
Right.
Okay, so maybe that's enough for this podcast. We can pick it up next time, and for sure, we'll finish the chapter in our next podcast.
Awesome. Thank you, Mike. We'll see you
Okay.
next time.
Okay. Bye for now.
Bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, please hit like and subscribe.